You will hear this story for the first time only in this video. Do not forget to write your comments about the story. Have a good listen. John Weaver's eyes fluttered open to a scene of disorienting unfamiliarity. The last thing he remembered was walking home from work, a routine he had followed for years. Now he lay sprawled on the cold pavement of a street he had never seen before. The buildings surrounding him loomed unnaturally tall, their shadows twisting and stretching in the dim, artificial light. Panic set in as he struggled to his feet, his heart pounding with the realization that he had no idea where he was or how he had gotten there. The city around him felt wrong. It wasn't just the unfamiliarity, it was as if the entire place was designed to unsettle. The architecture seemed to defy logic, with buildings leaning at impossible angles and streets curving in ways that made navigation a nightmare. John stumbled forward, hoping to find someone who could explain what had happened to him. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant hum of unseen machinery. After wandering aimlessly for what felt like hours, John finally encountered another person. A woman, her face pale and eyes wide with a vacant, haunted look, stood at a corner. When he approached her for help, she only murmured cryptic phrases that made no sense. "The shadows know," she whispered before shuffling away into an alley, leaving John more confused and frightened than before. As he explored further, the city's bizarre nature became more apparent. Streets that seemed straight from one angle would curve unexpectedly from another. Buildings changed their facades when he looked away and then back. The few people he encountered were equally unsettling, all speaking in riddles or ignoring him entirely. John's desperation grew. He needed to understand where he was and how to get back home. The first real clue came in the form of a small tattered notebook he found lying on a park bench. Flipping through its pages, John discovered frantic, almost illegible notes from someone who had been in a similar situation. The writer spoke of the city as a trap, a place where time and space were distorted. The notes mentioned the Watchers, shadowy figures who observed from a distance and seemed to manipulate the environment. John began to see them too. Shadowy figures that lurked at the edge of his vision, disappearing when he tried to focus on them. They seemed to follow him, their presence sending chills down his spine. Each encounter with these entities left him more paranoid and exhausted. Sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt their gaze upon him, their whispers filling his dreams with dread. Determined to find a way out, John retraced his steps using the notes in the notebook as a guide. The city's layout seemed to change constantly, but certain landmarks remained consistent. He followed these markers, hoping they would lead him to some form of escape. Along the way, he encountered other lost souls, all in varying states of despair and madness. Some had been there for years, while others seemed as newly arrived as he was. One night, while hiding in an abandoned building to escape the Watchers, John found a hidden room. Inside, he discovered a wall covered in maps and drawings, all depicting the city's shifting landscape. Among the papers was a letter from the previous occupant, a man named Marcus. Marcus claimed the city was a purgatory, a place where those who had committed great wrongs were trapped until they confronted their sins. John refused to believe he belonged in such a place. He was an ordinary man with no dark secrets, or so he thought. The more he delved into Marcus's notes, the more he began to question his own past. Fragments of forgotten memories surfaced, bringing with them a sense of guilt and unease. Was there something he had buried deep within his mind, something that had led him to this nightmarish city? The Watchers grew bolder, their presence more oppressive with each passing day. John could feel their influence, the way they manipulated the city around him, driving him towards certain paths and away from others. The environment itself seemed to conspire against him, with walls closing in and streets becoming dead ends just as he thought he was making progress. One particularly harrowing encounter left John physically injured. While trying to evade a group of Watchers, he stumbled into a trap, a pit that appeared out of nowhere. Climbing out with a sprained ankle and cuts on his hands, he realized that the city was actively trying to break him. Every step he took towards freedom was met with increasing resistance. As his physical and mental state deteriorated, John found solace in a young woman named Emily. She had been in the city longer than he had and seemed to understand its twisted nature better than most. Together, they formed a fragile alliance, sharing information and supporting each other through the worst of the city's torments. Emily spoke of a rumored exit, a place where the fabric of this purgatory was weakest. The path to this exit was fraught with danger. The Watchers were more numerous and aggressive, and the city itself seemed to lash out at them. Streets that had once been passable became choked with fog, and eerie noises echoed from the walls. John and Emily pressed on, driven by the hope of escape and the fear of what would happen if they gave up. Their journey led them to the heart of the city, a place that defied description. The buildings here were ancient and crumbling, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. In the center of it all stood a massive, twisted tower, its spire reaching into the sky like a claw. John felt a strange pull towards it, as if it held the answers he sought. Inside the tower, they found a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each more disorienting than the last. The walls were lined with mirrors that reflected not just their images, but their deepest fears and regrets. John saw flashes of his life, moments he had long forgotten or chosen to ignore. The guilt he had felt earlier returned with full force, and he began to understand why he was here. The climax of their journey came in a chamber at the top of the tower. There they confronted the source of the city's power, a shadowy figure that seemed to embody the collective anguish of all who had been trapped. It spoke to John in a voice that resonated deep within his soul, revealing the truth of his past. He had been involved in a tragic accident years ago, one that had claimed innocent lives. He had buried the memory, but the guilt had remained, festering until it had manifested in this purgatory. Emily's presence faded as the shadowy figure focused on John, leaving him to face his demons alone. The figure offered him a choice: confront his guilt and seek redemption, or remain trapped in the city forever. John, realizing that escape required more than just physical effort, steeled himself for the emotional ordeal. Confronting his past was excruciating. John relived the accident, the faces of those who had died, and the impact it had on their families. The shadowy figure forced him to acknowledge his responsibility and the ways he had tried to avoid it. John wept, the weight of his guilt almost too much to bear, but he knew this was the only way to free himself. As John's resolve strengthened, the city began to change around him. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, and the Watchers retreated. He felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced since arriving in the city. The path to redemption was painful, but it was also liberating. He apologized to the shadows of those he had wronged, seeking their forgiveness even if it could never truly be given. With each step towards acceptance, the city's grip on him weakened. The tower's oppressive presence faded, and the mirrors no longer showed his fears but his hopes. John felt a strange peace settling over him, a sense that he was finally on the right path. The exit Emily had spoken of became clearer in his mind, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Emily reappeared, her form more solid and vibrant. She had been a guide, a manifestation of his subconscious, helping him through the darkest parts of his journey. Together they approached the exit, a doorway that shimmered with a soft, welcoming light. John took a deep breath, knowing that stepping through would mean facing the real world and the consequences of his actions. Crossing the threshold was both terrifying and exhilarating. John felt a rush of emotions as he left the city behind, emerging into a world that was at once familiar and new. The memories of the Purgatory City remained, but they no longer held the same power over him. He had faced his guilt and found a way to move forward. The real world was not forgiving. John had to confront the consequences of his past actions, seeking out the families of those who had died in the accident. He offered his apologies and tried to make amends, knowing that his journey of redemption was far from over. The weight of his guilt was lighter, but it would always be a part of him. Life after the city was challenging, but John was determined to live differently. He found ways to honor those he had wronged, volunteering and helping others in need. The lessons he had learned in the labyrinth of shadow stayed with him, guiding his actions and choices. He no longer ran from his past but faced it head-on, embracing the pain as a part of his healing process. In the end, John realized that the city had been both a prison and a gift. It had forced him to confront his deepest fears and take responsibility for his actions. The journey had been harrowing, but it had also given him a chance to change. As he looked towards the future, John knew that he had been given a second chance, a chance to live a life of purpose and meaning, free from the shadows of his past. To hear more suspenseful and chilling stories like this one, please consider supporting my channel by subscribing and liking the video. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you!